In the mid-1980s, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant stood in the northern part of what was then the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, about 80 miles north of Kiev and just 3 miles from the purpose-built worker city of Pripyat. The plant was a symbol of Soviet technological ambition: 4 completed reactors, 2 more planned, and a bustling young city built to support the thousands of workers who kept it running. I'm Michelle,
And I'm Isaiah.
and this is Shifting Veils. As we approach the 39th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster this Sunday, we're taking a step back into the shadows of that day, into the tragedy, the aftermath, and the strange lingering stories that still cling to the edges of the exclusion zone.
By April 1986, reactor number 4 had been operating for just over 2 years. Engineers planned a safety experiment to determine whether the turbine could generate enough residual power to keep coolant water circulating during a blackout, just long enough for backup generators to start. It was supposed to be simple, but the test was scheduled during a shift change, delayed by grid demands, and ultimately carried out by a team that had not prepared for the altered conditions.
Why would you schedule like a safety test during a shift change? I
I think
mean,
I think that was just poor management when it comes to it. I think somebody wasn't aware of the safety test and just scheduled it, or the other way around. I think people who were scheduling shift change weren't aware of the safety changes and things collided incorrectly.
maybe. I mean, granted, you need to know how to do those emergency things no matter what time, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
shift change or middle of a shift, beginning, whatever. You need to know how to do it. But like, if you hadn't done this test before, why would you make that the first time you do it?
Right.
Which I'm assuming it was from the way it sounds. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think it's crazy that the test took like 2 years to take place, because the
Right.
reactor had run for 2 years, and then they decided to do a safety test that they've never done before. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if that meant that the safety test was a first for a reactor like that, but
Mm,
yeah, it's an odd thing, odd
I don't know.
situation.
By late evening on April 25th, 1986, operators began reducing power in reactor number 4, but things didn't go as planned. The reactor's power dropped far lower than intended. Operators withdrew most of the control rods to compensate, something the reactor design was dangerously sensitive to. Automatic safety systems were disabled to keep the test on track. The reactor was left in an unstable, low-power state that no reactor should ever have been in.
In at 1:23 a.m. In 1:23 a.m., the operators continued to follow through and initiated the test. Within seconds, the reactor's power surged uncontrollably. The reactor design had a fatal flaw. When the AZ-5 emergency shutdown button was pressed, the graphite tips of the control rods briefly increased reactivity before reducing it. In the unstable conditions that night, this triggered a massive spike in power. In less than 10 seconds, the fuel channels ruptured. Water flashed instantly into steam. Pressure blew apart the reactor's internal structures. A first explosion tore through the building. A second, even larger explosion followed, ejecting burning graphite and nuclear fuel into the night air.
The 1,000-ton reactor lid was hurled aside. The core was now open to the sky. Flaming graphite and debris rained down on the roof of reactor number 3, starting additional fires. Firefighters from Pripyat arrived within minutes, none of them aware they were walking into lethal radiation. They fought the blaze with no protective gear beyond standard equipment. Many would later suffer acute radiation syndrome.
Yeah, can you imagine? I mean, they think they're just going to go and fight a fire.
Yeah, just blindlessly going into work. I mean, maybe they had some of these thoughts in the back of their mind, but there's no time to think about that
Right.
when
I
you're
mean,
responding to stuff
w-
like that.
you're responding to a fire. You're a
Hmm.
firefighter responding to a fire, and
Right.
that's natural reaction to jump into your truck, head off to the fire, and put it out.
Right.
They're not thinking there's a graphite in the air. There is all this steam from a reactor core pumping into the air and raining down upon the building.
I'm not a firefighter, but, and I never have been, but I would imagine that when you're going to large, um, disasters like this, you might think about these things while you're on the way there,
Mm-hmm.
because that's all you have to do is
Yeah.
gear up and think about it while you're on the way there. But once you're there, it's just you look at the situation and you assess it and you act.
Right.
That's it. So I don't know, but I'm sure nobody had the idea of what the scope of this disaster was going to be or
I
end
mean,
up being.
some real stalwart humans there. I mean, they got there and they were moving. They moved people out of
Mhm.
the building. They were getting the fires put out. They were doing their best they could.
Right.
Inside the plant, chaos reigned. Operators struggled to understand what had happened. Some refused to believe the reactor had exploded at all, and radiation alarms maxed out instantly, giving no useful readings. The air shimmered with ionization. 2 workers died in the initial explosions, and over the next few hours and days, dozens of firefighters and plant personnel were hospitalized with severe radiation injuries.
Ukraine's government declared in 1995 that 125,000 people had died from Chernobyl radiation. A 2005 report from the United Nations Chernobyl Forum estimated that while fewer than 50 people were killed in the months following the accident, up to 9,000 people could eventually die from excess cancer deaths linked to radiation exposure from Chernobyl. As of 2005, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, some 6,000 thyroid cancers and 15 thyroid cancer deaths had been attributed to Chernobyl. A 2011 study by the U.S. National Institutes of Health concluded that exposure to radioactive iodine 131 from Chernobyl fallout was likely responsible for thyroid cancers that were still being reported among people who were children and adolescents at the time of the accident.
Pripyat, home to nearly 50,000 people, went about its morning the day the reactor exploded, unaware of the scale of the disaster. Children played outside, workers went to their jobs, weddings were held, the sky was clear, but invisible particles drifted through the air. Only 36 hours after the explosion did authorities order evacuation. Buses lined the streets. Residents were told they would be gone for 3 days. Yet most never returned.
You know, what's wild to me, I read something when I was looking at all this stuff. They had built an amusement park there that was scheduled to open, I think, in May of that year. But when this happened, they opened it early and let people in. So while all this is going on, all this is in the air, people are at this amusement park in the
Hmm.
open air. It's just, yeah, and that same amusement park sits, abandoned and creepy now, of course.
Well, see, it seems wild to think about now, but at the time, you have government officials like trying to calm people, also trying to figure things out, and also trying to cover things up.
Mhm. Well, you don't want
And
people to panic.
right, and so one of the best things to do in that situation, and we here in America should know that best, is to distract. So point and be like, oh, look away from the disaster. Look here. We have rides. We have cotton candy. We have snacks and treats.
And UFOs.
And and it's a free night. Come check this out. So like I said, it
Um,
seems wild now that we go over it, but
yeah, but it's
it's
happening today. And we
yeah.
don't even really know exactly what's what and to what scale either.
Right.
This is all hindsight stuff that you
Right.
see,
Yeah.
and we don't have that yet on current events. The destroyed reactor burned for 10 days, releasing radioactive isotopes into the atmosphere. Winds carried contamination across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and eventually much of Europe. The Soviet Union established a 10-kilometer exclusion zone, later expanded to 30 kilometers. Ultimately, more than 100,000 people were permanently displaced. To stop further release of radiation, thousands of people, workers, soldiers, engineers, miners, were mobilized. They shoveled radioactive debris, built cooling systems, and constructed a massive concrete structure known as the sarcophagus over the remains of reactor number 4. It was completed in November 1986, just 7 months after the explosion. They sent thousands of people back into ground zero in the radiation to shovel it.
Yeah. I mean, if
Somebody
they,
has to, I suppose, but my
yeah,
gosh.
I was going to say, if they didn't try and cover it up in any manner, that zone would be a lot larger than it is now. It
Mm-hmm.
would be
Yeah.
expanded well beyond Chernobyl.
Yeah, because it's still not contained,
Right. I mean,
even
that's
though it's
still,
contained.
yeah, it's still leaking all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
The Chernobyl incident has continued to be a source of long-term health impacts, including increased thyroid cancers among exposed populations and a massive economic burden, costing the Soviet Union billions. And yet, even with all the scientific reports, medical studies, and economic analyses, there are parts of Chernobyl's legacy that don't fit neatly into charts or official documents. Those who worked there spoke of other things: odd sightings, unsettling shapes in the sky, and stories whispered only when they were far from the plant. Among them, one figure surfaced again and again, gathering weight in the shadows of the exclusion zone: the blackbird of Chernobyl.
In the months before the Chernobyl disaster, several of the employees at the nuclear plant said they saw a large, black creature with gigantic wings and fiery red eyes. This creature was also seen in the sky only days and hours before the disaster. Based on the description of the blackbird of Chernobyl, it sounds a lot like another cryptid cult favorite, the Mothman from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I mean, it sounds like his cousin. It's great on it, and it's wild because I've always been interested in Chernobyl, but it wasn't until recently that I became aware of this blackbird of Chernobyl. I didn't
Hmm.
know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the claims about the blackbird, but there's also claims of just straight up Mothman as well. And yeah, I think you and I talked about that off podcast
Mm-hmm.
before,
Yeah.
where you were saying that you thought he was very local, but
Mm-hmm.
he's seen worldwide in different
Yeah.
places.
Maybe this is him
It
again.
could be. Maybe this is, like you said, the Russian cousin of the Mothman. We all have
Maybe.
cousins elsewhere.
Maybe.
The workers who saw the blackbird of Chernobyl reported experiencing terrible dreams and that their phones would ring only to have no one on the other line, or they received threats from what they assumed was the KGB.
Hmm.
Another
That's
story.
wild. So they got phone calls, like threats.
Well, if you remember, in the film
In a movie?
with Richard Gere,
Oh.
he was getting phone calls from the Mothman before the accident happened.
What movie? I didn't see this movie.
It's Richard Gere was in the movie about the Mothman appearing before the bridge collapse
I don't think I
on
saw that
Christmas.
movie.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's something simple like the Mothman something.
So did they get that from this? The phone like did they write that into the movie
No, I mean
script
that
from
that was a
this?
whole nother that's a whole nother incident.
The people that have seen Mothman before things have they also gotten phone calls?
Yeah, it was called the Mothman Prophecies.
What?
Yeah, with Richard Gere.
No, but I mean, aside from this movie, is that part of the phenomenon of Mothman? Is it people get phone calls like this?
Oh, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I mean, you already know that Mothman is a part of being a harbinger, basically, of disasters or
Yes.
events that
Yeah,
happen.
of course.
So I
That's just
assume
wild.
that that's part of the being a harbinger, but yeah, it was part of that story. So really, if you connect the two, it's very possible that it is a Mothman, or you know
Hmm. Curious.
another story about the Blackbird of Chernobyl says that people working in the plant and around the plant experienced a series of strange events that began after they saw a large, dark bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. It was said that the workers of Chernobyl were so unsettled by the creature and the strange experiences that had occurred after seeing the beast that several employees reported the sightings to their supervisors. There wasn't much a supervisor of a nuclear power plant could do about the blackbird, that it was terrifying staff. And even if they could have done something, disaster struck. Workers tasked with removing debris from the explosion spotted the blackbird of Chernobyl rising over the devastation of a toxic and abandoned city. Many people who believe in the Blackbird of Chernobyl consider the monster to be a bad omen, a harbinger of death and destruction, just like Mothman.
Can you imagine being like a supervisor and your employee? You have employees coming to you telling you that they're seeing this. I mean, what do you do?
It's actually funny because at my job, I keep telling everybody, because I worked at the store that I worked at. This is a little off track, but I worked at the store one night by myself. Like, I was the only person in the store, while except for the cleaners that we had. But I heard all sorts of different sounds, and I've told you about it before. It's kind of become a joke among pretty much everybody that I say it to. The place is haunted. There's things there. I
Mm.
hear things. I know things are there. I feel the presence.
Mm.
And I tell people, and they're just like, oh, ha 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 ha. Yeah, ha ha ha. I'm just like, whatever, man.
Yeah, because they don't have to be at work. They're
so
by themselves.
so it's like, it's just the opposite of this. That's, instead of the worker telling the supervisor is telling the workers, hey man, the place
Uh-huh.
is haunted.
Yeah.
But yeah, this
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it would be like, because I imagine that they would be like, you probably put a lot of time in. You're stressed out. We should probably send you to on vacation. Take a few days to yourself.
I don't know. I think I'd be talking to my supervisor, telling him, "Look, we need to close the plant for a week. Something bad's
Well,
gonna
but
happen."
that's what I'm saying though. If an employee comes to supervise, the supervisor would be like, I don't know.
There's no physical evidence that supports the claims of the cryptid's existence, and whether a monstrous cryptid provided a warning of impending doom or not, that warning was ignored. When the fires were finally out and the last buses pulled away from Pripyat, the story of Chernobyl should have ended with reports, cleanup crews, and the long, slow work of containment. But the empty streets and abandoned buildings didn't stay silent. As the years passed and nature crept back over concrete, people returning to study the zone began to notice things that didn't fit neatly into official reports. Strange accounts surfaced, quiet, persistent, and hard to explain, hinting that the disaster left behind more than radiation and ruins.
In 1997, more than a decade after the explosion at Reactor 4, the Chernobyl exclusion zone was a place of controlled access, rigid protocols, and long shadows. Most of the world had moved on, but specialists still entered the ruins to make measurements, assess structural stability, and monitor the decaying sarcophagus that entombed the destroyed reactor. One of those specialists was Andrei Karsukov.
Korsakov?
Karsakov,
I think so.
a nuclear scientist affiliated with the University of Buffalo. His visit that year was routine on paper, an early morning entry to gather radiation readings and structural data inside the remains of Reactor 4. But but what he later described to officials was anything but routine.
Andre arrived at the site around 7:30 a.m., escorted through the layers of security that guarded the sarcophagus. Access to the interior required multiple steps: identification checks, a password, and a biometric handprint scan. Every entry triggered a record. Every movement inside was monitored. According to the logs, he was the first person to enter that section of the structure in 3 years. Inside, the air was still and metallic, thick with dust that had settled over a decade of abandonment. The corridors were dim, lit only by the harsh industrial lamps that hummed overhead. Andre moved carefully, taking readings, noting temperature fluctuations, and listening to the distant groan of aging steel. Then, somewhere deep in the concrete maze, he heard it. A voice, faint at first, muffled, strained, then clearer. Someone calling out, someone pleading. The words were urgent, panicked, and unmistakable. It was a man shouting for help, begging for assistance to put out a fire.
Andre froze. The sarcophagus was supposed to be empty. No workers were scheduled. No maintenance crews were inside. And the voice wasn't echoing from outside. It was coming from within the sealed structure, somewhere below him. He listened again. The same desperate cry rose up through the corridors, thin but unmistakably human. He didn't investigate. Instead, he turned and hurried back the way he came, climbing the metal stairs 2 at a time until he reached the entry point. Breathless, he reported what he'd heard to the personnel who had cleared him for access. Their response was immediate and chilling in its certainty. They told him he couldn't have heard anyone. No one else had entered. No alarms had been triggered. No handprint or password had been used. The systems were functioning normally. If someone had somehow bypassed all of that, the security team would have known instantly.
What do you think he was hearing?
I don't know.
I mentioned him hearing like the groan of aging steel and whatever, but so you're hearing something, and I'm sure that like just the atmosphere is probably, well, it's been stated to be eerie because it's so abandoned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you've already got like the creep factor, and that freaks some people out. But I don't know. He said he insisted on what he heard. The staff insisted on what the logs showed, which, that's what they're designed to do, is show whether anyone enters or not. A voice calling for help in a place where no living person should have been. Whether it was an acoustic anomaly, a trick of the structure, or something stranger, no explanation was ever confirmed. The incident was noted, filed, and left unresolved. One more unsettling account in a place already heavy with memory, tragedy, and echoes that don't stay quiet. Even with stories like that lingering in the background, strange voices, odd echoes, moments that left people unsettled, the most tangible ghosts of Chernobyl weren't supernatural at all. When the evacuation orders came down, people were told they'd be gone only a few days. Pets weren't allowed on the buses. Families left bowls of food by the door, promised their animals they'd be right back, and stepped outside expecting a temporary absence. But as the convoy pulled away, dogs chased after the buses and cars, howling and running until they couldn't keep up. Those that survived became the first generation of strays in the exclusion zone, and today their descendants still roam the ruins, living reminders of the day the world around them changed forever. I've seen pictures. There is like a large community of stray dogs in the exclusion zone that are friendly because people do visit the zone,
Mm-hmm.
and these dogs are friendly and they approach the people. So they still seem somewhat domestic, even after all this time of being on their own and in the wild. I guess maybe because people do come in and out, they're still exposed to humans.
Yeah, I can see that being a thing. Yeah.
But that's just, to me, that is so sad. It makes me think of whenever we did the story on Katrina, because people that
The
were being
hospital.
evacuated, they couldn't take their animals. Yeah,
Yeah.
and people that worked at that hospital were allowed to take their animals with them, and then when they were evacuated from the hospital, they had to leave their animals in the hospital. They couldn't
Yeah.
take them with them. It's just unfair,
Hmm.
that I mean, Katrina was a natural disaster that was mishandled by humans. This was a disaster created by humans, and I know that nature can be really cruel, more cruel than we would like to consider. But I do hate it when our domesticated, innocent little furry family becomes a victim of, human negligence and error.
Absolutely.
That's just a sad thought to think of driving off. Some little boy or little girl looking out the bus window, looking at their dog down in the street, and they're driving away, and they don't know that they're not ever going to go back to get their dog.
Right. Absolutely. So, what is the exclusion zone like today? Well, it's illegal to live there, but some do, albeit few. It's estimated that 130 to 150 people live there, many of them older women who are still farming their family's land. There are no schools or health care, and it's definitely not safe to live there because it's still radioactive. Oddly enough, the area of the exclusion zone is now the third largest nature preserve in mainland Europe and serves as an accidental experiment in rewilding after nuclear fallout. With humans mostly gone, the population of deer in the zone exploded, and other species started becoming more common, including over 60 rare species. Wolf populations are now 7 times higher than before the accident. Eurasian lynx, brown bears, bison, and storks are only a few of the animal species that have repopulated the exclusion zone. While the area was mainly pine plantations before the disaster, thick primary forests have added biodiversity to the area. Przewalski's horses, which once roamed the entirety of Eurasia's plains, were declared extinct in the wild after the last sighting of one in the 1960s. However, when 30 Przewalski's horses were introduced to the CEZ, the population thrived. The wild population was increased to over 200, with new additions leading researchers to believe that the population will be sustained over several more generations.
This accidental population boom in both plants and animals is an example of growth in unlikely places on a large scale. Ukraine's government is using the CEZ as a tool to create a more sustainable and friendly environment for future generations. Chernobyl is often remembered as a single moment in time, a blast, a fire, a plume of radiation unfolding in the lives of the people who were displaced, and the workers who returned to monitor the ruins, and in the strange, quiet reports that filtered out of the exclusion zone over the years. Some of those stories were scientific, some were tragic, and some were simply unsettling. But beneath all of it, the sightings, the echoes, the folklore, there's a deeper truth. Chernobyl is a place shaped by human decisions and human consequences, a place where families were separated from their homes, their memories, and even their pets, a place where nature reclaimed what people abandoned, a place where the past never fully settles. And maybe that's why the zone still feels so heavy, not because of the paranormal, but because of the very real weight of what happened there and the lives changed, the land scarred, the stories left behind with no one to hear them. As we step back from the ruins today, we're reminded that disasters don't just leave radiation or rubble, they leave echoes, they leave questions, they leave the kind of silence that makes people lean in and listen a little harder. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the history, the mystery, and the lingering shadows of Chernobyl. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.